Brian, first, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Look, I was doing research for this, and I'm reading your book, and it was bending my mind. I don't like to start a show by saying, "Hey, tell us about your book." So I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to give you what I believe to be the sentence that defines your book, and I want you to tell me how you feel about it. Okay? It's very short. You can't be yourself by yourself. Tell me what that means.
Oh, that's a good one. There's a lot. I hope there's a lot of choices for sentences that define the book, but that's a really good one. So the basic idea is that who you are is constructed by other people. And without other people, you can't be yourself. So if you think of yourself as a man, if you think of yourself as a father or a son, or if you think of yourself as a podcaster, none of those things have any meaning without other people. Other people create the meaning that is inherent in those identities. And without those people, that part of yourself simply doesn't exist. So you cannot be yourself by yourself.
Do you think at the core of it, it's your book is kind of an exploration of how we are inherently not just social creatures, but social beings that rely on connection with others to even be alive, to have experience on this planet?
Yeah, I would make a distinction between the way we exist as animals, right? So I assume everyone accepts that we are animals. So there's a pure physical existence, but then there's being human, right? Being a human being. And that I don't think can happen without the presence of other human beings. So you cannot be a human being without other people, but you could be, you would exist as a physical entity, as an animal, running around on the earth. But I don't think that's what most people have in mind when they think of humans.
I see. So a small but important differentiator is you could exist, but you wouldn't exist in the way a human being longs to exist without others.
I would say you would not exist as a human being without others. You would exist as a Homo sapien. You would exist as some physical thing, but you wouldn't. A human being requires the presence of other human beings.
Okay. And you admit in the book, and you talk about it, that this could be seen as a pretty radical, oftentimes not just jarring, but divisive opinion, right? With so much of, you want to call it the self-help industry, talking about be yourself and your authentic self, and who you are is not dependent on others. This is almost the exact opposite of that belief system.
100%. You know what's funny about the book, Chris? When I talk to people like you, smart people who read a lot of things, there's a group of people who are like, yeah, obviously, because this idea of like social construction is something that if you're, a reader of this kind of work, you've heard before. I think that people just don't take it to its logical extreme. People say it and don't mean it. And so what I'm doing in the book is being really serious about what does it actually mean when you say that an identity is socially constructed? What's the consequence of that if you take it really seriously? And, the self-help stuff is something else, right? Like that is, I get it. People are out there. Life is hard. And people are looking for ways to engage it more effectively, looking for hacks. And I get the self-help industry's focus on the individual, like the person they're talking to as the sole determinant of how they experience life. But I think almost all serious social science just does not see humans in that way. So on the one hand, it is very mainstream social science. On the other hand, it's really radical when you examine it very seriously in your own life.
For those listening, if you happened to tune out for a minute, which sometimes we do, I want you to go back and listen to what Brian just said, because honestly, you just very eloquently and concisely described my experience in reading your book, which was initially, I wrote this down. It said, so is this pretty much about how bias shapes us, how we use experiences to figure out our current reality, and how we base our opinion of ourselves on others' opinion on us? And because that was the first 10 pages or so, and I was like, that makes sense. But what I then realized was exactly what you're talking about. We can say all that, but we almost never go deeper. We almost never say, but what does that mean for who we are and how we affect other people on a really, really deep level? Like, I will say, and I'm not sure if this was an intended consequence, but one of the biggest impacts your book had on me, I do leadership development. I do really personal development in my full-time job. And with this is a reinvigoration of the impact I can have on others. That is like the number one thing I got. Was that a design of this book or just an outcome?
Oh yeah, I think that it was an outcome in the sense that, I start with the idea that humans are social, and what does that mean? And I dig into the science that demonstrates some of the consequences of that. But when you start to explore it and play it out, you just see that, hey, we're being influenced by other people all the time, and in the ways that are deeper than we can truly sometimes understand and grasp. But, and here's your point, what that also means is we're constructing other people.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we interact with someone, we are changing that person. Like, what is our responsibility there? Like, what's in that? The power in those interactions is something I think we don't take seriously enough.
So I'm going to start to push on it. And a lot of it is just because I think it's going to be the best way to bring out your brilliance here. One thing you just said there, if you tell people we are influenced by each other, I think almost everybody listening will agree. But if you tell people we are constructed by each other, I think many people will disagree, be confused, etc. Tell me about the difference.
Um, Look, like, I'll give an example that's like really controversial right now. So I hope this is okay with your.
Of course it is. Let's
Okay,
go.
great.
That's the way to go.
So I think most people think of themselves as male or female, men or women. Like, and now there's, obviously, there are people who are non-binary. There's all sorts of ways that people can identify themselves in terms of gender, but the vast majority of people still probably think of themselves as either male or female. And they think of that as like a significant part of who they are, I would assume. I assume you present as a man to me, the way we've been talking, I assume you see yourself as a man. Is that fair?
Yep.
All right, great.
Yep.
And you see that as a big part of who you are and how you relate with others. Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay. You cannot be a man without other people. You have no idea you have no idea what it means to be a man except from what you've learned in the culture you exist in. If everyone that you interacted with said you weren't a man, you would cease to be a man. That's what I mean by constructing. Like that gender identity only exists in relationships you have. It's not inherent in you. You weren't born. This is the part that will sound controversial. You weren't born a man, you became a man. You were born male. I'll give you, like, I'm not denying biology. I want to be clear.
Right.
That's not the same. That's not what people mean, really. They're so closely tied, they get confused, but you can separate them.
But see, that example is, again, that's what you were saying earlier, when what we're doing here and what your book does is it takes these kind of obvious statements and unveils the deeper layer, right? Male versus man, influence versus construct, right? Like, that is exactly what I was getting at. And I think it's the perfect example. You also mentioned how it's starting to come out, people can identify differently, right? How I can understand the man versus woman. What about those that say, I am identifying as non-binary? Are they constructed societally?
100%. Here's the thing. Like, I don't. This is the thing, can be controversial for a lot of people. Some people like it, some people hate what I'm going to say next. If you believe that you can't be yourself by yourself, that includes every component of what it means to be you. By that I mean, you can't just decide your gender and be it alone. Like you need people to participate in that. And so every time you make a claim about what you are, it's a request for other people to engage you that way. And if they don't, from my perspective, you are not that thing. So if you say you're non-binary, I need to understand what that means. I need to understand what that means. We co-construct the meaning of that. We in an interaction, you tell me that, I respond to that, and in that moment, if I accept what you're saying, we are deciding what it means to be non-binary in that interaction. And then you just play this out over a long period of time, and you get this idea of like, okay, maybe it becomes established in the broader culture. Now everyone has a sense of what it means. So when you say that, now I know all the things that are associated with that, how I should behave. I know where you should be in the world. What bathroom should you be using? How you should engage with different people. Like all this stuff is developed in the community, right? So these identities are communal property, not the property of individuals. And then you ask to be included in that identity.
That's what I was just going to say. I think using gender is a good one because I can't say it's clear, but we can understand it. Let's say I actually don't know anybody personally that is non-binary or any of the things other than male, female, right? I don't know them in depth. So if I met somebody and I really had a long in-depth conversation and they said, I am this, name a thing, right? I would have to say, okay, tell me what that means for you. And then they would tell me, and I say, so how would you like me to do X, Y, Z? And in that moment, we are essentially constructing their self-belief. Is that fair to an extent?
Yes. You're constructing themselves in that, their self, you're constructing in that moment with them. Yes. And here's the thing this example is, I hope clearer, but it's hard. The bigger point I want to make is that you're doing that all the time with everybody. You just don't see it that way.
Right. What is the impact? I imagine, obviously, the amount of time you have spent on this subject and researching it, writing about it, and living it. You believe there is deep value in exploring this, understanding it. What do you believe that is?
So what I think happens if you take this seriously is you can have a deeper understanding of other people, and you gain possibly more compassion for yourself. And at a more societal level, at a higher level, I think it changes how we think about a number of conversations. I'll give you an example that's not like we've been focusing really tightly on the self, but I'm going to expand now.
Okay.
The conversation about immigration in the United States right now is fraught for a variety of reasons. One of the things that's almost certainly happening based on research is that there's a challenge to what it means to be American, that people are afraid that the idea of American is being shifted by immigration. Now, if you define yourself as an American, think about the challenge that poses to your sense of self, and more importantly, to the relationships that are based on being an American. Like, what does it mean to you to be American? And if that is shifting, it's going to be a little complicated. I mean, I'll take it back to gender to bring this down, and you can then maybe make the connection between immigration and gender.
Okay.
When people start to challenge the gender binary, they're like, yeah, I know if I told you I was a woman, even though I look the way I look, I dress the way I dress, I sound like how I sound, that will disrupt your understanding of what it means to be a man. Now, what if that affects how you understand yourself as a man and the relationships you have?
Mm-hmm.
You could have a serious problem with me messing, playing around, as you might see it, with your idea of what it means to be a man.
Right.
Changing other people's idea of what it means to be a man. Trying to change the cultural idea of what it means to be a man. What is that going to mean for you if you go through your life managing your relationships as a quote unquote man?
Do you think that's why
it's problematic? I think
I was just about to say, do you think that's why people have an issue with these things, whether it be the gender issues or immigration, is because it forces them to not only question the beliefs they have about themselves, but then it also forces them to question how they go about living, right? Because one of the things that I have struggled with the gender discussion is it takes a pretty black and white reality and it muddies it, which makes things more difficult, more annoying, more stressful for me personally.
100%. This is kind of the point I'm making. It's where politics becomes personal, right? So these discussions about gender, you can think of them as political discussions. But once you start fiddling with the communal property of identity, because remember early on I said that these identities are communal property. We have constructed what it means to be a man or a woman. And now that allows individuals to engage with that and other people from that shared understanding, right? When I'm a man, I go out, I know how people are going to respond to me as a man, and I can navigate the world in that way, develop relationships based on that. Once you start playing with that or fiddling with it, it creates a problem for me potentially. And that's where the political of this conversation about how should people be able to identify and gender non-binary, which I just should say, like, I'm on board with people identifying and being comfortable who they are, and I would support that. But it also is the case that it does affect other people, right? It's not just the person who's identifying that way. It's a shift that matters for people.
Well, and you just said something there again that I wanted to get into. You said it does affect other people. And I think this is one of the issues with the idea of we can all just be ourselves. Like, don't worry about me, be yourself type thing is it ignores the impact that we do have on each other. And here's the problem that I tend to believe, which is if we ignore that. Okay, let me rephrase this. I often think people say that, okay, don't worry about me, deal with yourself. And then somebody says, but we operate in a society. The next response is, well, now you're being selfish or you're being racist, sexist, whatever the ist is. We're judged for having the belief that we all impact each other because we're saying, why can't you just, stay in your lane, essentially?
Yeah, like why can't you just let me be and
Exactly.
do your own thing? Yeah, I don't know why this needs to be said, but apparently it does.
I like the start of this.
It's going to be a very simple statement.
Yeah.
We exist in a society.
Right.
I don't know where this went off the rails, but it seems insane to me that people honestly believe their outcomes in life and who they are is somehow just magically a product of them. It's insanity. And here's the thing. No one really believes it. Like if you have kids, it sounds like you have kids.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know that those kids were born. It's like they're your kids. Is like, who knows, right? They're your kids. That's what it is.
Yep.
But the fact that your kids is going to change their lives in ways that have nothing to do with what they did or what they produced or who they thought they were. You're going to help them understand who they are. You're going to construct them. And you probably as a parent see it that way. Of course, they'll have their temperaments and they'll, have their ways of being in the world that you can't change. But my guess is most parents feel responsibility for their kids because they see they affect them. I don't understand then how anyone can look at the world and be like, yeah, I just do it on my own. It's just me out here.
That's such a great point. Why are we so quick to recognize the impact we have on our closest sphere and then often very quick to remove the impact we have on anyone outside of that? How is that line that clear? Or where did it get that clear?
You should tell me, Chris. I don't know.
I know. Well, you know what you're making me realize? This podcast is global. I bet there are people in different countries who are going, what are you all talking about? Who thinks this way? Is this a pretty Western / American idea?
Yeah, I think that a significant part of this is like very Western. But I'm not sure all of it is. I think that human beings might be unable to completely break the illusion of individuality. I could be wrong about that,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just not sure that that it might take, if you can, it might take a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I do think there are very different ways of thinking about individuals' relationship to society, and I think that changes a lot depending on the culture you're in.
Mm. What does this mean for autonomy, individuality, self discovery, right? Like, how can I discover myself if myself is continually changing based on the relationships around me?
I Well, it just sounds like you answered it. Like the discovery is the fluidity,
Mm,
perhaps. And you know, the other thing, I often end up getting really abstract and philosophical, which
that's cool.
I
That's
can't tell if that's good or bad, but whatever.
it's both.
I think in writing this and talking about it, sometimes it's really hard, in part because I don't even know if I have the language to fully capture the complexity of what we're talking about, because you still have to reference a you and an I, and I'm saying all that is plural, but I don't know that I have a way of. By that I mean like I am a lot of people, but I
Hmm.
still have this experience. When I go through the world, I think about it just like everyone else. It's like me and in my head doing stuff.
Hmm.
I just don't think that's true, but it feels that way to me. And so it's hard for me sometimes to explain in really clear terms what it means to be a construction of other people. And so when you ask about self-discovery, that's a great example of, yeah, what I'm saying is you discover fluidity, but who is the you I'm talking about exactly?
I was going to follow up with this, right? And like, I love this. So if people don't want to listen, they can just stop, right? I mean, that's fine. We have enough kind of uh, TikTok-y type stuff. If you want 60 seconds of entertainment, go there. But because here's a question, maybe where I'm getting a little lost in this, right?
Mm.
I am starting to come around to this idea that my experience, my actions, um, my thinking is impacted, influenced, modified, constructed by those that I'm around, those that I engage with, the environments that I'm in. But what about the being doing that modification? Can't that be me? Right. So the person who is flexing in the environments, whatever's at that core, if we want to call it the soul, can that be the self? And is that immutable?
This is where I deny the existence of a soul in that way. I'm very, and I don't know if people know the term essentialist. I'm anti-essentialist, meaning that there's no inherent you that's like some core of you. Like, of course, there's like biological realities. That's
Mm-hmm.
true, but I don't think that's what people mean. I think they mean what you were saying, like a soul.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know what that is. Maybe one exists. If it does, I don't know what it is. So if somebody wants to like explain it to me, that's fine.
Right.
But
Right.
so this is one of those things where it might be something that we can cognitively comprehend, but we'll never have an intuition for. And so I'll give you another example from hard science, right? So physicists understand and know, and something about quantum mechanics, how the very subatomic, the world works at a subatomic level. Almost no one has an intuition for it because it just doesn't match what we can just understand in an intuitive way about the world. The math tells you, like, the
Mm-hmm.
math. You don't just know the subatomic world.
Mm-hmm.
What if part of the human experience is like that? That it's just intuitively not compelling. Like, you just cannot intuitively hold on to it. But when you look at the research, when you examine it in a reasoned way, you see a reality that's not the reality that you experience, or not your, and the risk of using another big word, Not it doesn't match your phenomenology. It doesn't match the way you just grasp and feel the world. But what if it's true and you just don't feel it? What would that look like?
I mean, look, I can get behind this, right? Like I can, because I don't have. I'd like to think it's a strength of mine, and it's built on this podcast. Like, um, I don't have an opinion tied to me tight enough to where questioning it will cause me any harm, right? It's more of an interest. So let's say, let me try and articulate, see how, if you feel like this. I think you said anti-essentialist.
Anti-essentialist. Yeah.
Okay. Would that be something like, it's possible that human beings, we are a biological phenomenon, right? We are made of things that we understand on a subatomic level, but almost blank slate, right? There isn't anything else other than those biological things occurring. And then as we develop consciousness or whatever we want to call it, it is then modified based on the environment continuously, right? And then I would say, I'm going to put two things out that without thinking I believe in. One is, I would imagine we do that for the propagation of the species, right? So it is a well created, well crafted part of evolution, which is, hey, these people got to work together, so let's make that part of their identity. The second part being, the reason it's not intuitive is because if what you and I are talking about was intuitive, is that more work than necessary to propagate the species, right? Like, do we need to have that intuition, or does it just cause more problems than it's worth?
Yeah, I think that's right. And there's a psychologist, a cognitive psychologist, Donald Hoffman. I don't know if you know of him.
I don't.
You might be interested in stuff. He talks
I'll write
about
it down.
reality. He's like, evolution has not pushed us to see reality clearly. It's pushed us to see the world in a way that's useful for our survival. And the chance that reflects the true underlying reality is slim.
Yeah, I look, by the way, now I'm definitely going to check him out. One guest on here, he gave me this, not to cut you off. I love this stuff. Mm-hmm. He gave me this analogy of we are the controllers of a submarine. And if you think about that, the controller never touches the water, right? Never touches outside of the submarine, but has a lot of opinions about it. And it's all based on the instruments it is looking through. It is feeling through, right? And if you keep going down with that analogy, it's quite fascinating. And I think it aligns almost entirely with what you just mentioned. So
yeah, so I'll give you another analogy. The one that Donald Hoffman uses, he talks about is, think about a computer. It's like there's a user interface. You work with that, and you like drag a file to the garbage and you want to erase it. There's no garbage. There's no file you're dragging. None of those things are like the reality of the machine is operating, but it helps you engage with the machine. And he's saying, like, yeah, we have a user interface for the world, and we behave as if that user interface reflects the underlying reality of the world. And he's like, it's probably more akin to the way the computer is. Like, you don't understand the underlying reality of the world. You just are engaging with the user interface.
Right. What would be cool about this theory, and I'm sure he probably talks about it, is maybe that's a large part of our evolution, is trying to understand that reality more and more.
I think so. And I guess when we talk about the self, one of the things that I find sometimes frustrating when you talk about the self is people expect it to be intuitively compelling. Like, all the questions about, like, how does this fit with how I experience things? I'm like, I don't know. And maybe it doesn't. That doesn't mean it's not true.
Right. Yeah. Wait a second. Yeah.
It's like, when I talk about physics, people, there's this reality that time moves differently as you move away from the earth. So as you go up, time moves. I think it moves. Don't quote me on this, but I think it moves more quickly higher than lower.
Okay.
It could be the other way around, but anyway, there's differences. And in fact, physicists can demonstrate the difference between time moving like at a table than on the floor. Like, you can show it.
Wow.
And that's people's reaction. Wow. They're not like, that's not true. They're like, wow.
Yeah.
If I tell you something about yourself, that's like, that sounds crazy. You're like, that's not right. You're not like, wow, really? You're
Yeah.
like, nah, that's not how it feels to me at all. That can't be.
Yeah. Well, if it shakes, yeah, like we were talking about, if it shakes the, your system up. I know we don't have unlimited time, and we have the book here and we're going to talk about it, but here's what I want to start moving into a little bit is how we can leverage this information, or it could be called opinion or thoughts, and there's a lot of science. I'd love to hear some of that from you, but to live our lives better. And by better, it's whatever your own definition of better is, but that is a lot of the point of this podcast. And I'll kick us off with one that I read about, but I don't quite understand yet. And I would love for you to help me out, which is, you talk about, you say in the book, the biggest determinant of who you are is where you are. And that line really hit me deep, because a large part of what I call anxiety in my life is when I feel that I'm forced to be in situations, so in places that I feel I have to be somebody that I don't want to be. And the easiest example is, I'll never forget this, my first day of my first job. I remember saying this to my parents later on that night. I said, I feel like an alien there. And really what I'm now realizing I was feeling like is I have to be a professional now. And I just didn't like it because I had been a kid in my mind. Right. What can we do? Well, first of all, explain this idea to us that the biggest determinant of who you are is where you are. And then what can we do with that information to maybe give us compassion or allow us to excel, or in your mind?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is the social situations you're in, like the people you're around. If you accept that like the self is socially constructed, then the people you're around are going to be the biggest determinant of who you are, right? That's going to determine who you are. Certainly in that situation. So the where, it's like I'm playing with it a little bit. I mean it both in terms of physical location, but more what I really mean is like the social environment that you're in. And people get this, right? Like in AA, it's like, don't go to places where you used to drink, right? It's just like you're around those people. It's going to be hard to not be the person you were when you were around those people in those places. So I think there's a general understanding of that, and what to do with it is, I'm gonna like take it a slightly different direction.
Okay.
I think people, because they believe that who they are is just inherent in them and they take it everywhere they go, underestimate how much they can be affected by changing their social location. And I think people sometimes, for example, depressed people tend to avoid other people. And one of the things that you would be told is like, try to find places or people to interact with that like shift your mood. That's one of the things you can do. I think when people they're anxious or they're nervous, sometimes their response is to like try to go inside to fix it. And it's like, that's probably a mistake. Right? Like yes, you can examine your perceptions of others and your thoughts, but you probably also need different spaces to exist in that will probably have a positive effect.
Okay. All right. We're staying here for a minute. We're staying here. I'm trying to be a good podcaster and phrase this in a question format.
I like it.
What then do you say to all of the recommendations, which are, if you have to change your social location to change your emotion, then you are just being weak. You should be able to overcome that emotion. So
that overcome emotion, that seems crazy to me. I'm just going to say, let me just start there. Let me just be very clear. I am not a clinician.
Sure. Yeah.
But no one should take this
somewhat
advice.
of an expert. So, okay.
I think about this. Yes. Yeah. I read things.
Yeah.
I've been studying psychology for a little while, about
Yeah,
20 years, a little
exactly.
while.
Well, don't worry. We're going to give your bio in the intro because you are now downplaying it. Okay. We have experts only on this podcast. Okay.
Yeah, I think there are people who study emotion, and I assume if you haven't, you should have someone on that talks about
Yeah.
emotion. It's fascinating. There's how do you evaluate a situation that can produce the emotion, right? It's they would call appraisal, right?
Okay.
How do you appraise a situation? But overcoming an emotion, I don't know what that means. I think when I talk to people, I do think that you should separate the emotional experience from the behavior that must follow.
Yes.
I think but that's not overcoming anything. And I think that your emotional experience, because it's tied to the way you understand what's happening. So two people could have the same experience. One person could get mad about it. The other person could be completely unmoved by it.
Mm-hmm.
So the emotion is not about the situation. It's about your experience of it, your understanding of it. Right.
Yes. 100%.
Right. And if you change your location, like how you understand situations will shift. And so it will change your emotional response to the same things because you will understand them differently because you will be different, not because the situation will be.
But what if my response to that is how do I word this? By trying to shift your experience or if I want to improve my experience, my internal experience, the emotions I'm experiencing, if I do that through changing my social location, I am giving up my authority, autonomy over my emotions, right? I'm saying that I am dependent on the situation as opposed to being reliant on my ability to handle the situation or interpret it the way I would like.
No, I just think it's like, what's the mechanism for interpreting it the way you would like? You think it's somehow in your head that you think like, I can just decide to interpret it differently.
Yes, there you go.
Maybe, but I'm saying that almost certainly if you put yourself in a different situation, you will interpret it differently. I don't know better. I'm not, just to be clear, it could be worse. Like you have to be thoughtful, but when you're thinking of yourself as a husband or father, the way you're going to experience certain things will be different than when you're thinking of yourself as a podcaster or when you're thinking of yourself as an alien in a suit, right? That movement through your life will change how you respond to different aspects of your life or different situations. And what I'm saying is, once you know that's true, you could decide to use that. It's a tool that you are using that to manage your experience of the world.
Because the reason I'm pushing is not only do I agree, I think, but I want to agree and I want it to be the answer. And here's why. It seems easier. So if I'm in a tough situation, if I go to, let's just use, because I know it the best. If I go to an office building that causes a lot of feelings of anxiety, and then there's another office building that I know does not cause those feelings, it is easier for me to just go to the other office than to deal with the emotion in the one that causes anxiety.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you can also do things like, here's an example of like changing where you are. I just thought of this now. I don't take it too seriously.
Yeah, sure.
So, if you're going to the office building where you feel uncomfortable, maybe you put on a suit and tie. People engage with you differently. You're a different person in that situation. The physical situation is the same. You have changed the nature of the social situation, and maybe you don't feel the same kind of anxiety. Not because it's not like the suit and tie made the anxiety go away. It shifted how people engage with you, which shifted who you were, which changed the experience. So I think there's all sorts. I think people, when I say where, this is why you have to understand that term very broadly, right? It's like by where I mean the social situation, which often is hugely influenced, obviously, by the physical location, but that's not the only thing that influences the social location. When I walk into a room as a professor, it's different than I walk into the room just as a Black guy. That's a different social situation. I'm in different places, and I will have different experiences of those places.
Right. In a sense, there's part of this that makes me think of the idea of use your sensations, experiences, emotions as a guide to where you want to be, which I do agree with. Is that something you talk about or have thought about?
Yeah, I don't really talk about it that much, but I do think there's information in emotion for sure, and you can pay attention to that. I think that people sometimes, this is just my opinion, and again, I'm not an emotions researcher, but I think as a human being, I think that people sometimes interpret emotions as commands as opposed to information,
Mm-hmm.
right? To be acted on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so if you go into a situation and you feel anxious, I think there's certainly information in that. And what I'm pointing to is you can respond to that by doing things that change how other people understand you. You can also leave that situation, but if you change how people understand you in that situation, it's going to change you in a way that will probably shift your experience.
And that gets back to the idea of how we are all imparting, you know, awareness and opinions on each other, right? We are constructing each other in real time.
100%. And like, I'll give you an example. And this is a research example. It's like something I did really, really early in my career. Um, you you can measure, let's call it associations with race at a non-conscious level. I think people are now that's common and it's implicit bias or whatever. That's the term that people use now.
Mhm.
At the time, this was not in the public conversation when I was doing this. Is in the late 90s. And people thought, including scientists, that they couldn't change very quickly because these associations are just out in the environment. We're just immersed in these associations. They become a part of how we see the world, and you can't change them easily for that reason. They don't move around very much. And what we did is we brought in people to a room, and we had either a black person or a white person in front of the room, and then we measured their attitudes, and it turned out it mattered who was standing in front of the room. And the question was, why did it matter? Like when there was a black person standing in front of the room, people had lower levels of implicit, associations, negative associations with race than when a white person standing in front of the room.
Mm.
So what we did is then we said, okay, we don't think it's the person. We think it's what you think the person thinks. So then we put on, instead of a black and white person, we had them wear a t-shirt that said eracism or nothing on it.
Okay.
And so even when a white person had on a racism t-shirt, people's associations with black people became more positive. Now they didn't know what was happening. The participants, the people that did the study, did not understand that we were even measuring their associations with race. They didn't
Okay.
even know, and they shifted. Now, why is that relevant here? In that situation, when you're engaging with someone who believes something, what you believe shifts towards that other person without you even knowing it. It shifts to what you think that person believes, and you don't even know what's happening. Like, and if you think you are your beliefs, who you are is changing as a function of what you believe that other person believes,
Mm.
right? And so there's these ways in which we are influencing each other that are deep and beyond even our conscious awareness, below the threshold of our conscious awareness. And so if I can shift how you think about me, that is going to change how you interact with me. And it's going to change how I feel about myself or how I experience that moment. And so, and this is a long way of getting to, like, there's all these opportunities to change how people are thinking about you, experiencing you, that will shift how you experience yourself.
How can we leverage that information to, if our goal is to have positive impact in the world and on ourselves? How do you think we can leverage that knowledge?
Good question. Chris, who do you want to be?
Who do I want to be?
Mm-hmm.
I want to be, I do. I want to be somebody who allows others to better enjoy their time on this planet.
Mm-hmm. And how do you have people engage with you in that way?
Ah, I, um, I try to, I do. I try to influence the situation in a way where they feel they can be more at ease, they can be more uh, open, they can be more curious and less guarded.
Hmm. So you think what you do can make other people be different?
I do.
Yeah, that's it. That's all there is.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, and other people are doing, and understanding that other people are doing that to you. Like
Right.
I mean, there's in some ways it's not. I don't know. It's not really. It's profound, but on some level, easy to understand when you think of it that way. It's like right now we are constructing each other. We're
Hmm.
having this interaction. Who you are in this moment is being shaped by me, and who I am is being shaped by you, and that's how we are constantly living our lives.
Yes.
And I'll leave this, and I'll be influenced by you in some way, and I hope that you'll be influenced by me, and I know that you want to influence your listeners.
Yep.
Like, what does that even mean? How could that be? Like, how could that be if you're not constructing who they are by how you engage with them?
Again, like it can't go overstated though. This is what's crazy about your message, right? This is kind of where we started the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and we're making this full circle, which is like you say it like that, it makes sense. But number one, I don't think we act like that on a moment by moment basis. I don't think we are consciously aware of it. I think if we were, we would be better as a society, right? And I think to your point, we also don't recognize the depths of it. And I give a quick example. You mentioned, I was actually going to ask this question. So how are we shaping each other in this moment, right? But you just mentioned it, we are. And I can tell you right off the bat, something that you have a calming, slower, but warm affect. That's just your style, right? It's thoughtful. It appears non-judgmental. That's just my interpretation. Okay. So you know what I do? I slow down. I allow myself to be okay with making some quote unquote mistakes, and I'll explain what that means, and be more thoughtful, which I think I've actually been thinking about this as we're going, leads to a deeper conversation, if you will. I know of people I've interviewed recently who are very high energy, very loud, but and I tend to be that way. And so it just elevates and goes and goes and goes. But then I go, well, did I ask the right questions? Did I think? So look, regardless of which one's better, worse, right, wrong, that's not my point. My point is, it is a palpable, internally recognizable impact. And this is virtual, right? I can only see your neck up, So imagine what's happening to us on a daily basis with thousands of people around us and in 3D.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, and I love what you said that it's like this is happening all the time, and you could use it to make the world a better place. I know that that's something that is important to you, as at least as you stated it to me. And I think people don't take enough responsibility for that. Like you see people, you see this all the time. Like you go out, you're getting coffee, and somebody's treating somebody like the barista, not nicely. Like why? I mean, like,
Yes.
I mean, it's if you take it seriously, and it is simple when you think about it. Like, what would that mean about how you should behave?
Mm-hmm.
And if everyone took it seriously, like I think, and I would hope the world would be a nicer, better place, that we would take more responsibility for each other. It's not like all our problems would magically go away and it becomes
Sure.
utopia,
Sure.
but I just think there would be a different world if people really understood the impact they were having on other people when they engage with them. If they were thoughtful about who they wanted to be in a situation and what that meant about who they were creating. And when you have a fight, like you are a participant in that. Like, what does that mean to you? Like, so you can think, you're asking, like, what do you do with this? Like, next time you have a disagreement with your spouse, like, how much of that is you and how much of that is them, right? It's easy to say, like, it's someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And if you believe in this co-construction, and this is an obvious thing, like, this is a version of It Takes Two to Tango, which is a little bit deeper, which is like, no, you are constructing the person you're fighting with. Like, that's a different way to think about it.
It is. And I think, again, that's something we kind of know, right? If somebody tries to make a point and you yell at them, they are going to almost certainly respond differently than if you say, good point. Let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Mm-hmm.
and this gets back to one of my original points, which is the scapegoat we use is you should be able to control yourself, or you shouldn't let me impact you. That is the scapegoat we use, right? What I do should not change you that much. And I think, again, to an extent, you are, well, but you also mentioned how we should pause between the emotion we have and the behavior we have. So whose role is it? Is it ours to modify our behavior accordingly? Or is it yours to, recognize you are causing that reaction in me?
When you're playing a game with two people, and let's say it doesn't matter what the game is, chess, tennis, doesn't matter. When you think of any game with two people, who's responsible for the quality of that game?
Right. It's both. Yeah.
There's no way to have a high quality game and say like it's one person. It's just not. I mean,
Yep.
you're constructing it, like that's a way of thinking about, you're constructing something together. Like, so it's not, I don't know. It's hard to say like whose responsibility is it. It's like a joint responsibility, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A common phrase that people give motivationally, hey, just be yourself. Just be yourself and it'll be fine. I have it written down in all caps. I can't let you go without that. Is that bad advice?
Tell me what that advice means first, and I'll tell you if it's bad.
Yeah. Don't try to change your actions based on what you think others want from you.
That's terrible advice. I think it's obviously terrible advice. I don't even understand the question.
That's why I'm asking you, right? Here's the thing. Most people don't say, just be yourself. And here's what I mean by that. They say, just be yourself. Now, yes, it's up to interpretation, but essentially being that your book is on self, right? What is your interpretation of that?
I don't, this is what I was asking. Like, to me, that's all you can be is yourself in any given moment. I don't even know what the other options are. So, like, I think, like as you described it, I think that's terrible advice, and I get that description. But really, don't respond to other people. But don't respond to their needs. Don't respond to their emotions. Don't try to connect. Like, what are we talking about? Like, that's insanity. And I think people just don't explore those kind of, I don't know, suggestions or advice. They just don't think about it very hard. And when you think about it just a little bit, like it doesn't take long to see like either it doesn't make sense or it's probably really bad.
Right. You know why I like it? I mean, and I know we're coming up on time here, but to a sense, you said something earlier I wrote down, which was, I think this allows us give ourselves more compassion. And I was going to ask what you meant by that. And I still want to know, but I'll give you my interpretation right here, which is if I go on let's say I'm 16, I'm going on a first date and I'm nervous and my parents say, hey, just be yourself. Okay. My interpretation, which I think is probably pretty common, would be, if I do something and this date doesn't like it, let's say I go, I love comic books, and the date goes, oh my God, those are for nerds, right? You have two options. You can go, I was just kidding. I wanted to see and now you're not being yourself, right? You are modifying. Or you can say, okay, my point with this is the compassion is to say, by being yourself, you can put that out there and use their response to determine what do you want to happen next. If your only goal is to get that person to like you, your only goal, then you can say, I'm just kidding. I don't like them. I wanted to see where you were, right? But if your goal is to genuinely connect with somebody who you have similarities with, then you just use that information as opposed to letting it kind of bring you down. I don't know. That's my analogy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to think about compassion in that example. So first, I would say, like at some point, other people influence you to like comics. You didn't just come out of the womb liking comics. You like comics because somebody else liked comics and you wanted to connect to them, or you wanted to be a part of something. So I don't know why it's somehow more yourself to like comics than to say you don't like comics when someone else says they don't. Like, so that's first. Like, so if you thought about it that way, there would be compassion in that. You wouldn't be like, "Why am I not being myself? And what am I doing?" Like, you just be like, "This is the nature of self, right? Like, I like comics in this situation with these people, and in this situation, and in this engagement, maybe I don't want to like comics, or I don't, and that's okay." So that if you thought about it that way, like, no big deal. Like, no reason to go home and be like, "Why did I lie about liking comics? I don't know." Because that assumes a true self. Like, my true self likes comics. Like, I don't know. So that's one way. To be compassionate, like you went with the flow. The other way is just to say, like, in that situation, like, I don't know why I like comics. Maybe because if you said to the date, like, she's like, "That's nerdy," I'm like, well, my dad was really into comics and I spent a lot of time with my dad. I kind of like comics. And maybe she's like, "Oh, okay." Or maybe she's like, "Screw your dad." And then you're like, "All right, screw you."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I'll tell you. But look, like, this is why I keep and I promise I'll let you go, but I keep finding questions to ask. Because even that example, you talking about, there's a reason you like comics. And if you find the need to defend that, and a lot of people will say, but the reason I want to defend that is because that's who I am. And really, that's a lot of that's at the core of what you're, I don't want to say arguing against, because you're not really, but you're saying is like, well, what is that? Who is that? How easy is that changed? If that's who you are, I can put you in a situation where you're not that person. So how much of a core is it?
100%. And what I would say is, like, to say that's who I am, what you're holding on to, I'd argue, is a relationship. Or some set of relationships. You just can't identify them. Right? Like, again, loving of comics didn't come from nowhere. Right? Like, and you probably share that love with someone. And I would argue that's probably more what you're defending than comics. What you're defending is, like, the relationships that love is embedded in. And then that way, what you're defending is yourself.
You know how so many people believe in, like, values-based decision making? I'm sure you've heard of that, right? Making decisions based off your values. I was kind of just, as you were talking about that, going in my head, going, okay, well, what are my values? And I have a sense of it. I'm writing them down. Where did they come from and why are they important? And a lot, I mean, I'm doing this on the spot, but maybe all are in some way values shaped on what I believe is valuable in a society. You know what I mean? Which just accentuates your point. I mean, really, like, one thing to, I think, keep in mind is, as we recommend this book and we talk about it, is, us being shaped by others. It can be one-on-one, or, and we've said many times, it can be one on millions or billions, right? And that is at the base of this.
Yeah, it's like amazing. We're social animals, and it's easiest to think about it and talk about it in terms of, like, individual relationships. But we exist in communities, right, that shape and define us. And those communities have grown, right? They include nations now. And I say this in one of the chapters in the book, that you can feel connected to millions, billions of people who you will never meet. Like, that is an amazing thing. And people can get really worked up about the connections and who they are defined by these billions of people that they will never meet. Right. It's just, when you think of it that way, it's, like, really incredible.
That's a good
capacity,
Yeah. Brian, this is awesome stuff, man. I knew it would be. I mean, reading the book, but, like, this is really crazy. Is this what you guys do at Stanford? You just, you just opine on self? Like, because that is exactly what I would imagine if I went to Stanford.
No, I don't think that this is I wouldn't say this is what we do. It's certainly what I do a lot of the time these days, though. Which is funny, by the way. I just have to say, like, I love the title. The title is, like, is selfless, right?
Yeah.
The social creation of you. But it's so funny because it's Selfless is the title, and all we do is talk about self.
About self. Is that common, or was that my bad?
No. That's common. That's what every conversation is about.
That's the goal.
Yeah. And yeah, like, what does it mean? What is that concept of, what do I mean by selfless? I don't mean like, generous. I just mean that, like, this essential self, as we discussed it, like this, that you are this core soul, is like, I just don't think that's true. And that's what I mean by selfless. Like, you certainly have a self,
right?
But the self that you have is probably not the one that you are, that you believe you do, or that you're experiencing as such.
That's a great place to end it, man. So Brian, I really appreciate it. The book, I have it right here, Selfless, The Social Creation of You. If you enjoyed this conversation, imagine a more articulate version. That is the book. And mostly because of me trying to fumble my way through it, but really incredible. You had me hooked extremely early on, and I've got highlights here that I planned on covering that we just didn't. So we'll be sure to link to the book. Brian, you also have a podcast where, you discuss just as in-depth ideas here. Tell us where that is, where else we can find you, what else you have going on.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Know What You See. So it's KNOW, What You See. And you can see it on anywhere you get your podcast, but also there's a website, knowwhatyouSee.com, that has other things too. So I do an open webinar. It's a class at Stanford that's open to the public.
Wow.
You can go on, they're on YouTube, the videos. They're interviews with really interesting people, and we discuss. The last season, we were talking about people implanted in the information era. So we talk about things like AI. We talk about climate change. We talk about all sorts of things that are related to things going on right now. And an example of guests, like I think my second one this season was Eric Schmidt. We talked to Timnit Gebru, who used to be at Google in the AI ethics.
Oh, okay.
Group.
Yeah.
So it really, I think the conversations are really interesting. So there's the podcast, and there's also, it's called Leadership for Society. So there's a class open to the public. People can check that out. Obviously,
that's the class. That's two different classes, or is that the class?
So there's the Leadership for Society is the class.
Okay.
The podcast is separate. So there's like a straight podcast.
Yep.
Know What You See. And then obviously the book is going to be released on the 28th. Maybe I assume that it's already released when people hear this.
It will be. Yep.
Yeah. And then and if you go to the website, knowwhatyouSee.com, like my writings and other things are up there. So that's how you can keep track of me. And I'm on Twitter at Brian Lowery, PhD.
I love it. We will link to all that. Incredible stuff, Brian. Really appreciate you bringing this knowledge to the show.
I really appreciate it, Chris. And thanks for all the questions. And thanks for reading and checking out the book. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. It's good. Like, you have me hooked. So I got to tell you. All right. Thanks, man.